they've got 3 minutes and we start out with a question like, so what do you think of the game last night? And they're like, okay, really? Do I want to spend a minute of my time talking about the game? I do not. So one of the easiest ways to pivot is like, wow, that game was really exciting. But one of the things that the thing that kept me up all night was how excited I was to be here on the show today.
At MBA Chartered Professional Accountants, we have 3 core beliefs. 1, we believe that business owners are the most important people on the planet. 2, we believe that the traditional accounting firm business model is flawed and fails to serve you. And 3, we believe the MBA way gives you what you truly want and deserve, resources and advice that helps you grow your business and your life. This is the MBA Way podcast. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the MBA Way podcast. I'm your host, Eric Solback, and today on the show, we have Kerry Barrett. Now, this is going to be a fun episode. She's an award-winning journalist turned PR coach and on-camera communication expert. And as you can tell, if you've ever watched the video portion of the podcast instead of just the audio, I love to be on screen. And I love to learn how to make it even better. And for our business coaching or for our business clients, for you to understand how you can use PR on screen to your benefit. And the one thing that she does share in this is how to excel in media appearances without relying on expensive PR agencies. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. We don't know each other, so it's going to be an exploratory meeting with her. And there you go. So Kerry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Yes, we saved all the good stuff for the show. We didn't do a pre-interview or anything. So we're like going by the seat of our pants with this one.
Yeah, which is the best part. I mean, it's jazz, right? It's jazz music. We're just away we go. So Kerry, give me a little more background for our listeners here on this. I mean, you're an Emmy award-winning journalist turned PR coach. 10 years experience on New York's biggest stage. You were a news anchor. Give us a little quick synopsis of your experience and what brought you to doing this.
Yes. Well, thank you for asking. So I was in the news industry for 20 years. I started out in a very small town in Texas. That was my first job. And then it took me all over the country for the next 20 years. And as you mentioned, I ended up at WNBC in New York City, where I spent the last 4 years of my career before I leapt out of the news world and leapt into whatever was coming next. I didn't really start with a plan. In fact, I had no plan. It's not that I didn't really start with a plan. I had zero plan. So one of the things as I was exploring what I could bring to the table to help people with all of this sort of news background and experience that I have is really 2 elements. Number one is how to communicate effectively on camera. I launched my business right before the pandemic. So little did I realize at that moment that skill was going to go far beyond just being able to create 30-second reels on Instagram or whatever. It's now everywhere. And also teaching small business owners how to generate their own publicity without hiring a PR coach, a PR agency rather. And I know you mentioned that, I think one of the big challenges for a new business owner is establishing, or a relatively new business owner is establishing visibility and credibility. But they don't have a huge ad budget, right? Which, by the way, is not PR. Advertising is advertising, 2 separate things. I don't really work in the pay-to-play space. And then how to navigate all those intricacies of the media. At the end of the day, journalists and editors and writers for magazines, they're all just trying to do a job, which is to serve the audience. But for an outsider, it can seem like a labyrinth to try and navigate all of that stuff. And really, it doesn't have to be. So I help people figure out, what their pitches are, what their stories are, who their contacts are, meaning, how to establish those connections with press and then pitch themselves.
So I could unpack a whole bunch in here.
Yes.
Can you explain to me the difference between PR versus advertising? Like you just said, I don't play in the advertising space, but you're in the PR. So could you differentiate those 2 for me and the listeners?
Absolutely. Advertising is guaranteed. You pay for it and you show up somewhere. PR is not a guarantee. You don't pay for it. It is sometimes referred to the opportunities that you get as earned media. And I'm putting that in air quotes. I don't know why. Doesn't deserve air quotes, but what that means is it is media and publicity that you earn through your expertise or the value that you can share. So it's not, I'm going to pay to be featured here, or I'm going to pay to run an advertisement here. Now, there are pay to play PR, and I'm going to put those in air quotes, opportunities. I, again, consider that to be advertising, but you'll see, pay this amount of money and feature on this podcast, or pay, a certain amount of money and we'll put you in Forbes, or whatever the case may be. But there are plenty of opportunities for media where you're not paying to be featured, where you're generating those opportunities strictly through your expertise and your stories.
Got it. So what we're doing here right now, this is PR, because we obviously didn't pay you to do this. You actually reached out to me, which was really cool, because you said, I watched one of your podcasts, listened to it. It was fantastic. Here's my credential. I would love to be on the podcast. And I was like, you had me at hello.
Yeah, that's a pitch.
That was a fantastic pitch, because I was like, I would love to have you on the podcast and be able to share your expertise with our business audience, and so that they understand that they can do this. And it is a world that, used to be just for the news anchors and like what you did in the old school media. But now it's like, it's so prevalent. And COVID, like, timing is everything in business. You nailed that one. COVID, you come in, you're starting to show people how to do on-screen PR. Yeah. Right when COVID hits, that you couldn't have asked for a better storm.
Right.
I'm not trying to make that a good thing, but for you, it was good.
You're not advocating for COVID in any way. Yeah.
But for business, it's fantastic. It was for you. Great.
Yeah. For timing, it was all right.
Yeah. So you've been focusing on the entrepreneurs, and what is the biggest hang up that an entrepreneur has, or the biggest obstacle that you've seen for them to get on camera, to start promoting themselves, doing PR for themselves? What is the biggest obstacle?
Well, there's a couple of them. And if we're talking from the media space, it's not recognizing necessarily what makes a good pitch. So where most, I want to say newbie, but I see it happen over and over again, where most pitches fall flat is that they come from a marketing angle versus a news angle. What I mean by that is, chances are, unless you are, Stephen King or Tim Ferriss or, I don't know, J.K. Rowling, unless you are one of those caliber offers, the fact that you published a book in and of itself is very likely not newsworthy. What may be newsworthy in your book are nuggets of valuable information for your audience, for the news media's audience. So if you are, let's say you wrote a book about health and wellness, and you are in the sort of December, maybe late November space, what's a great pitch? Like 3 ways to up your health game in 2025. And by the way, I have a new book. Here's 3 elements that I think would be really helpful for your audience. And you pull out 3 little nuggets that showcase what it is that you can talk about. That's not, everything that you can talk about, but 3 juicy little nuggets that maybe they haven't heard before, or put a new spin on an old mindset around health or nutrition. That is the news pitch. It's not, hey, my book is coming out. Do you want to cover it? So that's where most pitches go wrong. When you're first starting out. In terms of the actual on-camera element, where most people go wrong is that they don't prepare, and they're afraid of it. I find that a lot of people talk about tech and time and all this other stuff, and this applies when you're making video content for your social media or your website or anything. Really, at the heart of it is there is a level of fear of rejection that feels so much more personal when you put your face and your voice to it. And when someone is rejecting, feels like anyway, you as a person rather than just your words. Are you afraid of that too?
I was nodding my head, because it's like, it's a rejection of me as a person and getting out there. I mean, I started doing online videos 8 years ago, and started, handheld video, and started doing for my company, the Accountant Success Formula. That's how I started in with McFadden Buttar, or MBA Chartered Professional Accountants. That's how I got started with them, is I was coaching them. But I started doing videos, but I remember the first few videos, I was scared to death and I was shaking and I was like, I know they're horrible videos too. That's the funniest thing. I went back and showed some people that I said, look at this crappy video from 8 years ago. I'm like, hello. And I am teaching this thing. There's no relaxed feeling because I'm the fear of rejection and fear of the camera, like just staring at it going, oh, what do I do here?
And I think, it's important to normalize that. I happen to work with, for whatever reason, I don't necessarily target them, but a lot of lawyers seem to be drawn towards that particular service, teaching them to speak effectively on camera. And it's crazy because I have worked with lawyers who are the top of the top of the top when it comes to what they do. They've litigated household cases, Harvey Weinstein, 9/11, the cases that have resulted in billions of dollars worth of settlements. And yet they are leery and hesitant to get on camera because it's unfamiliar. They're not in a safe space, or there's an immense amount of pressure to get it all right all the time. And that in and of itself keeps most people from trying. Here's the thing though, if you are going to want to pitch yourself to, let's say specifically TV or video podcasts, a lot of hosts, and definitely most TV outlets, are going to want to know that you are able to command an audience and that you can communicate effectively on camera. So most of them, not all of them, but most of them are going to ask you for a reel, or they're going to look at your social media or your website and see if at the very least there are videos there that show that you are, interesting is really what it comes down to. And if you don't have anything to show them, the likelihood of you getting booked has just dropped exponentially.
I love the fact that you're talking about getting visibility and credibility through earned media, the concept of earned media instead of paid media. I guess that's the difference between PR and advertising. But getting that the PR has to be, and the first thing we talked about was finding the story behind the thing you're trying to sell, like having the actual, what's in it for them? What's in it for the listener and the PR firm that you're actually talking to? Or in your case, you're like, hey, Eric, this is my skill set. This is what I can bring to your audience. And I was like, oh yeah, sold. Like you had me at hello because you said, I can show your business owners how to pitch and excel in media appearances. And I'm like, this is fantastic. It's this coming up with the story behind the thing you're trying to actually accomplish. That would seem that's a creative process, and it's coming up with that story, which is primal, because that stories sell, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%. Stories will sit with people. Stories are what make you memorable. There are other elements certainly that go into making somebody memorable and demonstrating their expertise. But if you were pitching yourself for a feature somewhere, there absolutely has to be founder story or some sort of origin story that goes into your why and what is compelling about it and why there will be an emotional connection with the reader. If you are, or the viewer for that matter, if you are pitching an element, for example, let's go back to the health and wellness example that I used a couple of minutes ago. If you're pitching a new book, your story might not necessarily be directly in the pitch, but I have this particular skill set to offer. This is why it's timely. And then an element of your story goes in what is your media bio, which helps create a connection and demonstrate your expertise for the people who are on the receiving end of your pitch. Not necessarily the end user, which is the audience or the viewer or the reader, but you're creating a connection with the journalist or the editor. And I will tell you this, sometimes as the founder, it's hard for me sometimes even to see exactly what my story is. It's one of those things that the cobbler's children don't have shoes because you're so busy doing for others. It's hard to see the forest for the trees. So one of the things I like to do is, as I'm working with somebody who is, in my PR program, go back and figure out what their founder and origin story is. And the way that is implemented will differ depending on who and what you're pitching. Again, if you're pitching a feature story to Forbes and you want to land on the cover, you have to have a very compelling origin, founder, brand, whatever it is, and it works into your bigger service or your product. if you are pitching your local TV station because you have 3 tips to, make sure that you nail your resolutions for the new year, the story doesn't factor into that quite as much. Where the story becomes more prevalent is in the bio that creates a connection with the producer or the editor or the reporter rather, who's viewing that pitch and deciding whether in fact you're going to make it onto the air. Like one of the things that I like to include. So I was on NBC News this past spring, and I pitched them a story about how to use video marketing to grow your business, especially when everybody was talking about TikTok being banned, which may or may not happen as of this recording. Nevertheless, one of the things that I included as sort of a sub-line in my bio was, I used to be terrified of speaking in public. I then used that fear to grow a 20-year career as an award-winning news anchor. Here's a link to some of my videos. So that was my story. This is why I know that people can do it. It's why I know that business owners can, in fact, get on camera and deliver compellingly, because I overcame the same fears that they did. And I used it to craft this 2-decade career in a very competitive industry.
So what I'm hearing you say is that, because I always think about a media bio, like you got this media bio and you send it off and it's the same one every single time. But what you're doing is you're crafting the bio and the message to the actual PR, the earned media that you're going to. And it's like you're taking the time to craft the message so that it's what's in it for them specifically, as opposed to, we'll call it the shotgun approach. You just, here's my media bio and this is what I can do. You're honing it and you're showing business owners to think through what's in it for the actual earned media outlet, and how can you craft your value to them so that they're going to want to just like say yes, like I did.
Absolutely. I have like 5 different media bios, and it may not all be plug and play, but I craft them for different areas of expertise. And they all have a small story that goes along with it. Now, when I'm putting a media bio together, a media bio on a pitch is pretty short. We're talking about 1 paragraph that's probably 4 or 5 sentences, maybe 2 paragraphs if you really need some further explanation. So it is an extremely condensed story, but it's something that's designed to pique, curiosity and them wanting to reach out for additional information. But yeah, I absolutely do not use the same bio for every pitch. It would depend on whether I'm pitching at NBC or whether I'm pitching a Forbes and what exactly the pitch is. Am I talking about how to teach executives to speak better on camera versus am I looking to talk to small business owners and teach them about how to generate their own publicity? I'm going to draw on my 2 different areas of expertise within the news industry, communication and pitching. And I'm going to focus in on one of them, again, depending on what exactly it is that I'm pitching.
Yeah. And that was going to be the next question. It's like you could read my mind here. I go to this concept of all roads lead to what? What's the call to action? You're trying to get something to happen. So when I've seen this happen on some podcasts and some earned media. Now I understand the phrase of that earned media, where people they're there to provide a value, but then they keep trying to get you back down into the thing they're trying to sell. Like all roads lead to, for your case, your paid services or whatever that is. Where's the difference between going, I'm here to create brand awareness around me without having a specific call to action? Because I always think of advertising as a call to action. PR is about brand awareness. Am I on the right track here, or are you always trying? I mean, obviously you're always trying to create the brand awareness so they eventually do the call to action and work with you. But when do you overtly put it in there and when do you non-overtly put it in there?
Yeah. Well, you have to do it intentionally. It's, by the way, read my book, and it awkwardly holds up book and then makes a weird plug to the audience does not work. And you're not going to do yourselves any favors with either the audience or the producers. I guarantee they're never going to have you back. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. If you are, let's say, on TV, and mind you, the TV interviews are quite different than podcasts. There are generally not show notes. They're maybe 3 minutes long, especially if it's live. And so you might ask, is there a way that I can put a link up on, that you can put a link up to my service or product on your website? And then at the end, the anchor, the host will say, for more information, head to our website, check out blah, 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 blah. And that's where your call to action is. In fact, that's almost always how I wrapped up interviews when I was on, the anchor desk and I was talking to an expert. If you're interested in blah, 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 lawyer, or if you have more questions about blah, 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 you go to the website and, here's the link or whatever. If you are doing a written article, for example, if you're, guest posting in Forbes, oftentimes there will be a byline and you can put a link to your free service there. The way to do that, though, very naturally in both is to subtly plant seeds. And I've done it, as a matter of fact, a couple of times during this podcast. When I work with clients, one of the questions they have is, when we're working on creating a story, or, that's one of the ways that I help my clients understand what their media personality is. I'm making it up at this point, whatever it is. You're subtly showing the audience that this is something you do, and there are clients that you do this service for. And then at the end, in a podcast, there's usually show notes, hint, hint, wink, wink. And in a written post, there's a byline, and in TV, there's often a link on the website. But you can plug subtly on TV. Recognize this. Like right now, as much as I'm talking, our interview would have been done 10 minutes ago.
Right.
I don't have this much time. So when you are planning a TV hit, for example, you've got to make sure that your message sings. I mean, it should always sing, but you've got, 5 minutes maybe to answer something and add more clarity in a podcast. You've got 30 seconds to do it in a TV interview. So I always ask the producer, is it okay for me to mention that I do this with clients? Will we have enough time to do that? And if you don't, you don't, but recognize that you now have that media clip. Even if you're not allowed to directly plug yourself or even indirectly plug yourself during that media hit, you are now able to say, as seen on, CNN Business or Fox Business or CNBC, and you can blast that out on your socials, and you can blast it out to your newsletter, and you can put it up on your LinkedIn, and you can create a special offer on your website that links to as seen on NBC. I mean, I've got one up on my website under my resources section. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can leverage that opportunity, even if you're not able to directly sort of plug yourself in the moment.
And for the listener out there, what we're talking about here with that logo on your website that says you were as seen on NBC, there's your social proof.
Yeah.
Right. That's social proof. And so, the PR is, and then leveraging that appearance on those earned media outlets becomes part of the assets you should be reusing and putting up and talking openly about this. Like, don't be shy about talking about what you do, where you've been, and who you've talked to about it. And because it's all social proof, showing that you actually know what you're talking about and you're an expert in the field.
One of the things you can do it's an easy trick for your newsletter is if you did write an article, let's say, 3 tips on nailing your resolutions for the new year. When you blast it out to your social or your email list, you can say, here's 3 tips. There's also 2 that I didn't get a chance to mention in the article. And here's the additional 2. And so you can work in that social proof and letting people know that you were seen there, and even share the clip with them, and then add some additional value on your social or on your newsletter, your email list.
Right. So when you're working with business owners, you're obviously helping them craft their media bio, and showing them how to have the right conversation with it. Are you also showing them how to present themselves and doing that whole part? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So let me just clarify. When you say present yourselves, you mean how are you communicating on camera specifically?
Yes. And presenting and then we got a whole topic around brand awareness and who you are as a brand, and consistently, if anybody who's watching the video here right now, I mean, I go by Eric, the Viking Soulback, and there's Viking shield and axe, and I'm, wearing Viking paraphernalia. That's my brand. But I'm talking about, like, do you work with that as well? You talk about brand aware. Are you going all the way through that whole messaging with the business owners that you work with?
Absolutely, 100%. So I would say this. Most of the people that come to work with me are already established in their business. They're not scraping by, but they've hit a wall when it comes to revenue, visibility, credibility, and they don't want to spend a ton of money on ads. They're not looking to spend $4,500 a month on a PR agency, but they recognize that there's opportunity in putting their message out on other channels that are not owned by them, meaning their socials or their newsletters, but that are, earned channels, NBC, CBS, Forbes, Business Insider, et cetera. And so one of the things that they generally have their messaging, they generally know what they are in terms of their brand. One of the things that we work on is there's a whole module on creating your messages. So we create one of these grids for each interview that you do. And it is this basically 3 columns. Oftentimes you find that they fall into problem, solution, call to action. But I ask people to take about 7 minutes to walk through every single thing that they want to say in this particular interview. Let's say you've pitched yourself as a health and wellness expert for the new year. What are the things that you absolutely know that you want to say in that interview? It's almost as if you sit down and you pretend that the reporter says to you, we're too lazy to come up with the questions. Write down every single thing that you want to say, and then we'll craft the questions around that. So what you do is you do that for 7 minutes. You come up with every single thing that you want to say. And then you put them into 3 columns. You see where those answers generally lie. And oftentimes it's problem, solution, call to action, better, problem, way to make it better. And then some sort of, again, call to action or, action item or action step. And you put your answers into these 3 sort of headings. And then you use these 3 columns as a way to craft whatever it is that you're asked. So your goal as the interviewee is to get the message out that you want to get out. Now, this is a much more in-depth process than I can go into in a couple of minutes. Part of it is how you frame your pitch, the questions that you suggest they ask you, the way that you suggest that they introduce you. All of that is framing yourself and giving yourself a little bit more power within the interview or within the segment. But then you use these 3 columns to create a 3-level answer that allows a little bit of depth in what you're saying and allows you to answer whatever question they ask with something that is solidly pulled from the messaging that you want to make sure that you get across. And then we take those 3 columns and we turn them into sound bites. So sound bites are the things that make a TV interview sort of sizzle or pop. It's the things that make them memorable. If you were to think about a sound bite in a print or digital interview, you would think about the pull-out quotes. You see the little text on the screen, and then there's a section that is big, and that's the part that's the sound bite or the quote. So we figure out how to turn those messages into quotes. All of those elements combine to showcase your brand and who you are and what you stand for and your mission and your vision and whatever else it is that you want to make sure that you articulate during the process. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but it's a more complex answer than may meet the eye when you first ask it.
I'm soaking this up like crazy because one of the things that I did is after I sold my first accounting practice and started up my new consulting business is I took Jeff Walker's product launch for me. So I was in the marketing copy space and learning about copy and how to write it and then brand awareness and marketing. And so I love this. So I love the way you've taken it also. And it almost sounded, and don't take this the wrong way, but it almost sounded like a politician. You ask a politician a question and they turn around and they answer the question they wanted you to ask. But so you're almost doing that, but you're doing that in a subtle way where you're preparing yourself ahead of time for when the question comes in. If you answer it directly, you're not going to get across the point you really want. You're preparing yourself ahead of time. So when the question comes in, you can answer that question and answer the question you wanted to answer.
I would never want somebody to come across as a politician, but you make a very good point, because I've heard people say that before. Or are you telling me you just want me to say the same thing over and over again? And I absolutely don't. But if you're asked a question, you can answer the question and then set it up with something along the lines of, but it's important to note, or for a little bit of background or context. And then you jump into what it is that you actually want to say, because those messages are the things that you need to get across. And remember, whomever is interviewing you is likely not an expert in whatever it is that you're talking about. So they're quickly doing research, which is why I like to use a booking sheet and send them questions in advance, so that, I mean, sometimes they use them, but it helps frame the conversation. And they are likely to ask some questions that are, out of left field, or that you're not prepared for, because again, you're the expert in this space. They are not. So understanding what they're likely to ask, and then being able to pivot from whatever that answer is into the thing that you actually want to say, all while not looking like a politician.
Right. Sorry, I'm going to rephrase what I just said.
No, you're right.
You're answering the question you want to answer, but unlike a politician, you are actually going to answer what they asked, but then lead it into answering the question you wish they had asked, so that you can get the messaging across that you want to get across. And it's interesting, as you're explaining this, I've gone to lots of podcasts and interviews and speaking events, and I've actually found I didn't realize I was consciously doing that. But they bring some to me and I'm like, yeah, but that's not the real meat of the question. What you want to do is go over here. So it's more like, okay, that's great, but really, let's go over here. This is the fun stuff, right? For me, it's like, this is the fun stuff, and bring some energy to it and go, I can answer this. I will. And here's the answer. But think about that. This is where the meat is,
Yeah. And one of the really easy ways to give an example of that is, when I used to work in Philadelphia, we had a very long morning show, and we always had lots of guests on. Philadelphia also happens to be a very big sports town, and there was always something going on that people wanted to talk about. So let's say we brought in a lawyer who was doing, I don't know, some sort of live interview on some sort of legal thing that had broad appeal. They've got 3 minutes, and we start out with a question like, so what do you think of the game last night? And they're like, okay, really? Do I want to spend a minute of my time talking about the game? I do not. So one of the easiest ways to pivot is like, wow, that game was really exciting. But one of the things that the thing that kept me up all night was how excited I was to be here on the show today and talk about blah, 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 blah. And the host will take their cue. They will absolutely take their cue. They'll giggle, and then they'll move on to whatever it was that they were going to ask you. So that's a very easy way to see what I'm talking about. You're answering the question, but then you're moving things forward, and you're taking control of the interview that way.
Right. And that's where you is what you're doing with your clients. And tell me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, is you're showing them actually how to take control of the conversation. So when you're on earned media, you're there to bring your expertise. Don't just sit back and let them drive the bus. You want to be able to bring the message across. And that's why I love how you have people do, and I was us, look, I'm already joining your program. It's like, you prepare yourself ahead of time to say, here's the things I want to get across, and thinking about it clearly, so that when you're going into the interview, you're clear about the message you want to get across, so that you're able to actually control where the conversation goes, so to speak, or at least control where you're answering and getting your message across.
100%. And the reason I do it in 3 columns, if people are wondering why I don't just write things out, is because sometimes in the heat of the moment, when the stakes feel very high, you get lost in whatever it is that you're saying, or you are, you forget your ream of answers that you had written out. I have found, and I use this technique even when I'm doing media training specifically with, executives and CEOs, putting things into this sort of 3-column system allows them to get a visual cue of what their answers are, where their answers cluster, again, if it's problem, solution, call to action, and then allows you to pull an element from each to put together an answer that is in depth and adds value, rather than, again, trying to memorize reams of answers to questions that you may or may not be asked.
Yeah. And from a cognitive retention standpoint, there's tons of research around this. I have a psychology degree as well. So that's something I really love, is once you get past 3, goes to 4, your retention drops off like a rock. So that's why I always think there's a magic in 3s. Just keep it simple. When we're talking to clients at our firm with MBA, it's like, don't say more than 3 things. When you talk to your client, don't give them more than 3 things to do. Don't give them more than 3 things to remember, because as that goes past 3, it just drops off like a rock.
It is. So it's so funny that you mentioned that. I'm working with somebody in the wealth tech space right now, and I'm actually getting them ready for their virtual pitches. This doesn't have to do with earned media, but I use that same messaging system to prepare them, and they have now implemented it in all of their written assets as well, because they used to dive really deep into all of these problems. And I'm not in the wealth tech space, so half of that language is foreign to me anyway, but they realized that they were making this so complex. And you're right, there is a certain magic in the number 3. In fact, it's one of the techniques that I advise people to take into consideration when they're creating their sound bites. We came, we saw, we conquered, men, women, children. I mean, we see this pattern played out all over the place, and there's a reason. It sticks with us.
And I think it definitely stops us from getting caught in the curse of the expert. As the expert, I found myself doing that. I was on a reader's panel. I got asked to read a manuscript for this book that was coming out. And so I did the reading, and I could only get through the first few pages because it was like this fire hose of information. And by the way, I'm really bad at this. I'm consciously aware of the fact that I'm a fire hose when it comes to stuff. But it's the curse of the expert. You're trying to get so much information all out at once. It's like less is more. Slow down, clutch down, get the key points here. Just remember, everybody doesn't know this topic as in-depth as you do. Try and just parse it out. So I love that 3s, just 3 main points you're trying to get across to the listener or the reader, so that you're not having verbal diarrhea, which I tend to do quite often. And the listeners are going to laugh right now because they're like, oh yeah, Eric, you're the one who does this. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I'm working on it, You
do too. I do too. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So you said, do you have an online course? You do one-on-one coaching? Like, how does the model work? I'm really curious about that.
I do. So I have, the bulk of the teaching is done digitally. It's done via videos and online resources. So there are pitch templates and media contacts and media bio templates and booking. There's all sorts of online resources. And then, like I said, the bulk of the training is done via my video program. Then there's an action step at the end of each module, of which there are 18. And then during our one-on-one sessions, which is how I offer the live portion of the training now, done virtually, every other week, we unpack those action steps. So you're trying to generate story ideas, but you're getting stuck. Okay. So we're going to unpack that and work on that during our session. Or you are trying to create pitches and you've created a few, but you need some feedback and you're not sure, how you need to change your bio for each pitch. So we unpack those action steps and then obviously go as deep as we need to with any additional questions that they have. So by the time they get through this program, which is 3 months, they will understand everything from, understanding how the media works, getting into the mind of the media, making the media love them, understanding how to generate story ideas, how to craft pitches, how to ace your messaging, how to show up and communicate effectively on camera, how to leverage that opportunity for not just revenue, but also additional PR opportunities, because PR begins to snowball on itself. One outlet will see you quoted or featured as an expert on another, and then suddenly they want you as well if your interview is compelling. And so each opportunity builds on itself. So how do you fully leverage? And then how do you create a media strategy that evolves? So, you starting here, these aren't always going to be your pitches. This isn't always going to be what you want to talk about. So how do you create a strategy that takes into account your expertise, where your audience is, because they move sometimes, and what platform or outlet it is that you need to be reaching out to in order to get in front of that audience. And I like to say there's really 2 sort of buckets that PR goes into. One is visibility and one is credibility. So for example, when I pitched my story to NBC, there's not a lot of business owners who are watching NBC in the middle of the day. They are doing business. They are working. However, for me to be able to say, as seen on NBC, adds a certain level of credibility and cachet to my expertise, which means that when I pitch to a smaller TV show or when I pitch to a Forbes, I can say I was featured here, and I can tell clients, or clients can learn that I was featured here. That is not necessarily a visibility driving appearance. A visibility driving appearance is really getting in front of the audience that will, buy your product or purchase your services or whatever it is. So in my case, that is much more aligned with like a Forbes or a Business Insider or even a home business, for example, online outlets that people can reach all times of day.
Right. So it's the strategy around how you bring this forward, which I love. So it's an 18 modules, so a 3-month program online, and it's mixed of online and is it one-on-one training or group coaching? Like, how does that?
One-on-one. I would love to launch a group program. That's my goal for next year. But right now it's one-on-one.
Oh, we should talk about that offline because I got lots of experience in doing those as well.
Oh, awesome.
And the big thing is telling you what I've tried that doesn't work. That's the big one. Like I've got a laundry list of stuff that I can tell you that doesn't work. So
yeah. We should chat. Those lessons are always in the failures.
Always. And every business owner that's listening to us, they're like probably doing the bobblehead doll going, yep, I tried, didn't work. But here's the thing. So to find out where they can get more information on yours, because I'm definitely going to go in and look into that program as well. And what you have there is they go to your website. Is that the easiest way to get there?
Probably the easiest way is actually to go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn serves as sort of my mini landing page where I'm talking very heavily on this particular service right now. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn, it's Kerry, Kerry, Barrett, Barrett. You can find me on the other social platforms as well, or shoot me an email. Either way.
Perfect. And we'll have, and you didn't have to drop it in there. We do show notes for all the podcasts. So it's going in there. The tech team will handle all of that stuff. This has been a lot of fun. Again, for the listener there, we'd never met each other before, and this was this was an exploration for myself as well. And now I'm even more curious and getting into this. I'm going to be looking into your program for sure, because I always want to improve my knowledge in this space. And every business owner out there, if you're listening to this, being visible and credible in front of your ideal audience is the key to success. And then you can start getting that snowball. It's absolutely magical. So, Kerry, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to further conversations with you about future group coaching and any other collaborations we can do together.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
If you're a business owner or CPA who believes the accounting profession has let you down, then please reach out to us at www.mbacpa.ca so we can have a chat to see if we're a fit to work together. We're always looking forward to talking to you. See you next time.